The desert night was silent, the kind of silence that pressed against the ears and made every breath sound too loud. Torches burned in the distance, and a crowd of alien villagers gathered in a circle, their faces hard and cruel. They dragged a young woman forward, her hands tied, her face pale in the firelight. Her heart pounded, but her voice broke into a whisper. She begged them not to do this, but her words only made them laugh. They called her useless, cursed, and unworthy. They said she could not bring children to the clan, and so she deserved no place among the living. The sand was cold under her bare feet, but sweat ran down her face. She was shaking. Every step was heavy as they pushed her toward a deep pit in the desert ground. The pit was waiting, dug by strong hands earlier that day. Its walls were steep and cruel, and she felt her stomach twist in terror. She tried to fight back, pulling against the ropes, but the men holding her only laughed louder. One shoved her, so hard she stumbled forward into the pit. The sand rose around her knees, and she screamed. They did not care. With shovels and cruel hands, they began to bury her. Sand fell over her legs, then her waist, then her chest. Her breath grew fast and shallow. She begged again, her voice rising high, but the crowd only shouted over her, chanting words of tradition, words that declared her life had no meaning. Her people had chosen death for her, and she felt the heavy weight of the earth closing in. Her head was the last thing left above the ground, hair tangled and covered in dirt, eyes wide with terror. The villagers stood around her, satisfied with their work. Some spat at the ground, some muttered curses. Then they turned away one by one, leaving her in the cold sand. The torches faded into the distance until only the stars remained. The night air grew colder. The desert wind cut against her face. She tried to move, but the sand held her still. Her chest burned as she struggled to breathe. Every sound in the dark felt louder. The howl of the wind, the far-off call of an animal, the beat of her own heart. She thought of her life, short and empty, filled with loneliness. She wondered if this was truly how it would end. Not with love, not with kindness, but buried alive because she was different. Her voice grew weak. She whispered to no one, to the stars, maybe even to gods that had long abandoned her. Tears ran down her dirty cheeks, her eyelids grew heavy. She thought she would not last until dawn. Her strength was fading, but in the distance, there was another sound, faint at first like footsteps on sand. A figure moved in the shadows, closer and closer. It was not one of her people, not the cruel villagers. This figure was taller, broad-shouldered, with a strange outline against the starlight. He carried no torch, only a small lantern glowing faintly in his hand. He was human, a wanderer of the desert. His name was Daniel, a lonely father who had lost his wife years ago and now traveled with his young daughter. He had been walking the desert road back to his small home when he heard something strange, a sound like muffled crying carried by the wind. He almost thought it was a trick of his tired mind, but then he heard it again, faint and broken. He paused, turned his head, and saw the shape in the sand, a face staring out, half hidden by shadows, eyes wide with fear and desperation. Daniel's heart pounded. At first he thought it was a nightmare, but then he realized it was real. Someone was buried, alive. He dropped the lantern into the sand beside him and rushed forward. The alien girl flinched as his shadow fell over her. She thought perhaps the villagers had returned to finish the job, but instead the stranger's voice was calm, deep, and filled with something she had not heard in a long time. Kindness. "Hold on," he whispered. "I'm going to get you out." His hands dug into the sand, scooping it away as fast as he could. The grains cut into his skin, and soon his knuckles bled. But he did not stop. He worked with desperate strength, shoving the dirt away from her chest, her waist, her legs. He pulled until at last her arms were free. Then he lifted her out of the pit and onto the ground. She coughed, air rushing into her lungs. She could not believe she was breathing again. Tears spilled from her eyes. She looked at him with disbelief. Her voice was weak and cracked. Why would you save me?" she asked. "They buried me for a reason." Daniel shook his head, his breathing heavy from the effort. "No reason is worth this," he said. "You're alive, and that's enough." The girl stared at him, her body trembling from weakness, her heart torn between fear and something else. Something she had not felt in years. Hope. The desert wind blew between them, and for the first time since her punishment began, she was not alone. The human wrapped his cloak around her shivering form, lifting her into his arms with care. His lantern light flickered as he carried her into the night, step by step away from the pit, away from the cruel voices, away from death. The stars above watched in silence as a lonely father made a choice that would change both of their lives forever. Daniel's arms were tired, but he did not stop walking. The girl's body felt so light in his grip, too light, as if she had been starving for weeks. Her head rested weakly against his shoulder. Her breaths came in short, broken gasps. Her skin was cold against his chest. He pulled his cloak tighter around her, protecting her from the desert night. His lantern swung at his side, casting long shadows over the dunes as he made his way toward his small home at the edge of the desert. The girl stirred once, whispering, something too soft to understand. Her voice was cracked and broken. Daniel leaned his ear closer. She whispered, Why would you save me?" Her words barely louder than the wind. He looked down at her face, half hidden by dust and sand, her eyes flickering open for a moment. He answered gently, "Because no one deserves to die like that." She stared at him in disbelief, then her eyes closed again, her strength fading. When he reached his home, a small stone house built against the cliffside, a little figure was waiting at the doorway, his daughter, Lily. She rubbed her sleepy eyes and blinked at the sight before her. She saw her father carrying someone, a girl with strange alien features, her skin a pale shade unlike theirs, her hair tangled with sand. Lily gasped, "Papa, who is she?" Daniel spoke calmly, though his breath was heavy. "Someone who needs our help." He laid the girl gently on a simple bed inside, lighting another lantern to push back the shadows of the room. Lily hurried closer, her young eyes full of curiosity. "Is she hurt, Papa?" Daniel nodded, wiping dirt from the girl's face with a cloth. "She's very hurt," he said, "but she will live if we care for her." The girl moaned softly, flinching when his hands brushed the rope burns on her wrists. Daniel's heart tightened at the sight. He fetched water, carefully lifting her head and letting a few drops touch her lips. She coughed weakly but then drank as if she had not tasted water in days. Her eyes opened a little, meeting his gaze, and then flicked to Lily's small face beside him. There was confusion there and fear. "Why?" she whispered again. "Why save me?" "I'm cursed." Her voice trembled with shame. Daniel shook his head firmly. "You are not cursed," he said. "You are alive. That is all that matters." Lily touched the girl's arm with small fingers. "You can stay here," she said, innocently, her smile soft and full of trust. The girl's eyes filled with tears. No one had ever spoken those words to her before. Her people had called her useless, unwanted, better off dead. Now a child was offering her kindness without hesitation. The weight of it pressed against her chest until she choked on a sob. The night stretched on. Daniel cleaned her wounds as best as he could, wrapping her arms and legs where the sand had rubbed raw. His hands were rough from years of labor, but his touch was careful, gentle. The girl watched him with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Each time he helped her, each time he gave instead of taking, she felt her heart ache. She whispered her name at last, barely audible, as if afraid to claim it. "My name is Sterile." Daniel repeated it softly, committing it to memory. Lily grinned and said it too. "Sterile," she whispered happily. The alien girl turned her face away, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Daniel prepared a thin broth from the food they had, helping Sterile sip slowly. Every swallow seemed to bring her back a little more. Color returning to her cheeks, her eyes no longer dull but shining faintly in the lantern light. She tried to speak again, her words broken. They buried me. Because I cannot." Her voice cracked, but Daniel did not let her finish. He placed a hand gently on hers and said, "It does not matter. You are safe now." But outside, the desert was not silent. In the distance, faint voices carried on the wind, the sound of villagers searching. Selai froze when she heard it. Fear flashing in her eyes, she tried to sit up, but her body was too weak. "They will come," she whispered. "They will kill us all." Daniel looked toward the door, his jaw tight. Then, back at her. "Let them come," he said quietly. "I will not hand you over." Selai stared at him, her heart racing. Why would a stranger risk himself, risk his child for someone who meant nothing to her own people? She could not understand it. She had been ready to die. She had accepted it. And yet this human had pulled her from the grave itself. He had chosen her life over his peace. As the hours passed, Selai drifted in and out of sleep, sometimes whispering apologies, sometimes crying in silence. Each time Daniel or Lily was there, Lily even hummed a soft tune beside her bed, brushing her tangled hair with careful fingers. Selai felt warmth she had never known, a warmth more powerful than fire. When the first light of dawn crept through the cracks in the stone walls, Selai opened her eyes fully. The night of terror behind her, she saw Daniel seated nearby, his head bowed, asleep in a chair from exhaustion, his daughter curled up beside him, both of them watching over her through the long night. Her chest tightened with an emotion she had never felt before. For the first time she realized she wanted to live, she wanted to stay. She wanted to believe that maybe she was not cursed, maybe she could belong. Her people had buried her, but this human had dug her out. He had given her more than breath. He had given her hope. And though she was weak, though fear still pressed against her heart, she whispered a promise to herself as dawn painted the desert sky. She would not waste this second life that had been given to her. The morning light spilled softly into the small stone house, the desert outside still quiet from the long, cold night. Selai lay on the bed, her body weak, but her mind restless. She turned her head slightly and saw Lily, the little human girl, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a worn doll in her hands. Lily smiled the moment she noticed Selai was awake, her smile so warm that Selai almost forgot the pain in her chest. Daniel entered from the other room carrying a wooden bowl with steam rising from it. The smell of broth filled the air. He placed it carefully beside her bed, his eyes meeting hers with a calmness she had never seen before. "Try to eat," he said gently. Selai hesitated, her hands trembling as she reached for the spoon. She felt ashamed, needing help like a child, but Daniel only guided her quietly, holding the bowl steady while she tasted the warm liquid. The first sip burned her throat but filled her with comfort. She swallowed slowly, tears pricking her eyes. Food had never tasted like this before, not because it was rich or special, but because it was given freely, not demanded or stolen, she whispered. "Thank you," her voice breaking. Daniel nodded once, not asking for more words. Lily leaned closer, her big, curious eyes staring. "Papa, can she stay with us?" she asked in her innocent tone. Selai froze at the words, her hand shaking so much she almost spilled the broth. No one had ever asked if she could stay. No one had ever wanted her presence. She looked at the child in disbelief. Unable to speak, Daniel gave a soft sigh. "For now she needs rest. We will see later." But there was a gentleness in his tone that gave Selai a spark of hope. The day passed slowly. Selai tried to sit up and help, but her body was still too weak. Daniel insisted she remain in bed. Though she hated feeling like a burden, Lily, however, brought small treasures to her side. A smooth stone she had found, a piece of fabric she used as a blanket for her doll, even half of her bread. Selai did not know how to react. Each gift was like a small light in the darkness she had lived in for so long. As the sun climbed higher, Daniel worked outside, chopping wood and repairing tools. Selai watched from the doorway. When she was strong enough to stand for a moment, she saw how his movements were steady, practiced, how his shoulders bore the weight of responsibility. She saw Lily running around him, laughing, and felt a strange ache in her chest. This was what family looked like, something she had never been allowed to have. When Daniel came back inside, he found her staring at the floor, lost in thought. He placed water in front of her and asked quietly, "Are you feeling stronger?" She nodded weakly, then whispered, "I should not be here. They will come for me." Her voice shook with fear. Daniel's jaw tightened. He set the cup down and looked at her firmly. "You are safe here. he said. If they come, I will face them. She looked at him with wide eyes, her heart pounding. No one had ever spoken words of protection for her before. Later that evening, as shadows stretched across the desert, Sterile sat beside the small fire inside the house. Lily curled up next to her, resting her head against Sterile's arm. At first, Sterile stiffened, unsure how to react, but when she felt the steady breathing of the child, she slowly relaxed, her hand trembling as she let it rest lightly on Lily's shoulder. Daniel watched silently from across the fire, his face calm, but his eyes full of something deep, perhaps relief, perhaps quiet hope. Sterile felt a strange warmth spread through her chest, the kind of warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. She thought of the pit where she had been buried, of the cold sand pressing against her skin, of the cruel voices calling her useless, and then she thought of this moment, of a little girl who leaned against her without fear, of a man who risked his life to save her. She wondered if perhaps the universe had not abandoned her after all. When night came again, Sterile could not sleep. The house was quiet, the lantern burned low. She turned her face toward the ceiling and whispered to herself, "Why me? Why did he choose to save me?" She did not realize that Daniel, sitting just beyond the doorway, had heard her words. He answered softly, his voice steady in the dark. "Because I know what it is to lose someone, and I will not let it happen again if I can stop it." Sterile's throat tightened at his words. She closed, her eyes trying to hold back the tears, but they slid down her cheeks anyway. She had been given a second life, a chance she thought she would never have. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, or how long she could stay. But in this small house, for the first time in her life, she felt something she had always longed for, a place where she belonged. The desert wind blew softly outside, carrying with it whispers of the world beyond, but inside that home, between the fire's glow and the quiet breaths of a human father and his daughter, Sterile felt safe and deep. Inside her, a fragile hope began to bloom, hope that this shelter was more than just a place to hide. It could be the beginning of something she had never dared to dream of. The days passed slowly, and Sterile began to feel her strength return. Her wounds healed little by little, and the color came back to her face. Yet even as her body grew stronger, her mind was full of fear. Every night when she closed her eyes, she saw the pit again. She felt the cold sand pressing against her chest. She heard the villagers' cruel voices. Sometimes she would wake up with a scream caught in her throat, her body shaking. Daniel always came when she cried out. He would sit beside her bed, his voice low and steady, telling her she was safe now. Lily would curl against her other side, holding her hand with small warm fingers until the trembling stopped. Sterile would whisper apologies, ashamed of her weakness, but Daniel never scolded her. He only said, "You survived what no one should. It will take time." Outside the little stone house, the desert was restless. Rumors spread through the alien village that someone had freed the buried woman. The elders were angry. They declared that this was an insult to their law, and they promised punishment for whoever had broken their tradition. A few villagers swore they saw strange footprints near the pit that night, not like their own. They guessed it was a human's doing. Suspicion grew, and search parties were sent into the desert. Sterile knew they would not stop, and each time she heard voices in the distance or the howl of the desert wind. She thought it was them, coming to finish what they started. She tried to tell Daniel to send her away, but he refused. "You have nowhere to go," he said firmly, "and my home is not theirs to control." His voice carried a strength that made her chest ache, because no one had ever defended her before. One evening, when the sun was falling and the sky turned red, Sterile sat by the small fire inside the house, her eyes staring into the flames. She whispered, "I should have died there. My people chose it for me. Why do you fight their choice?" Daniel looked at her across the fire, his rough hand still from sharpening a tool, his gaze steady. "Because their choice was wrong," he said. "Life is not something to throw away. Not yours, not anyone's." She lowered her head, tears burning in her eyes. "But I cannot give life, I cannot give children. To them I am worthless." Her voice shook as she spoke. Lily, who had been drawing shapes on the dusty floor with a stick, lifted her head. "You gave me stories," she said softly. "And you smile now. That is worth something." Sterile turned to the child in shock, her tears spilling. Daniel added quietly, "You give hope, even if you do not see it yet." That night, Sterile tried to sleep, but shadows crowded her mind. In her dreams, she was back in the pit, the sand climbing higher, her chest unable to rise, voices shouting above her. She woke suddenly, gasping, her body drenched in sweat. Daniel rushed in, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. She looked at him with wild eyes, whispering, I'm sorry. I am sorry, I cannot escape it." Daniel's face softened. "You do not have to escape it alone," he said. "We will carry it with you." But outside, the danger grew closer. The villagers had begun moving toward the cliffs where Daniel's home was built. Some came at night, watching from a distance, their torches flickering on the horizon. Sterile saw them once through the small window. Her heart nearly stopped. "They are coming," she whispered in terror. Daniel followed her gaze, his eyes narrowing. "Let them come," he said with a voice that carried no fear. But she knew the risk. She knew they would not forgive him. The next day, Sterile tried to help more around the house. Though her body was still weak, she cooked simple meals, mended a torn shirt of Daniel's, and told Lily stories of her childhood. Though most of her memories were filled with pain, she turned them into gentle tales for the girl. Lily laughed at her words, tugging at her sleeve and asking for more. Sterile smiled through tears, realizing she had not heard laughter around her name since she was very small. Yet every small moment of peace was shadowed by the knowledge that her past was not finished with her. She could feel it like a storm building at the edge of the desert. Her people had buried her once. They would not accept that she was still alive, and they would not forgive the human who dared to defy them. That evening, as the desert winds rose and howled through the rocks, Daniel sat sharpening a blade, his face serious. Sterile watched him, her heart tight. She whispered, "Why do you not fear them?" He looked at her with calm, steady eyes. "Because fear changes nothing," he said, "and because you are worth protecting." The word struck her like fire. She lowered her face, her tears falling silently onto her hands. When night fell, Sterile lay awake, the wind rattling the shutters. Outside she thought she heard footsteps, whispers, maybe even the distant cry of her own name. She pressed her hand to her chest, her heart racing. She turned her head and saw Lily sleeping peacefully beside her. Daniel sitting in the doorway with his blade resting across his knees, watching the shadows with eyes that did not close. For the first time she realized something powerful. She was no longer alone. She was no longer the unwanted woman waiting to die. She was part of something fragile but real, a shelter, a bond, a family. And though fear pressed against her heart, like the desert wind, a new strength began to grow inside her, and deep in the night, when the voices outside seemed closer, Sterile whispered to herself, "They will not bury me again." Her voice trembling, but her eyes burning with something new, not fear, but the first spark of defiance. The night was heavy with silence, but Sterile could not rest. She lay on the small bed, her eyes fixed on the faint light of the lantern. Every sound outside made her body stiffen. Every gust of wind against the stone walls made her heart race. She knew it was only a matter of time before they came. Her people would not allow her to live. They would not allow a human to defy them. The moment arrived sooner than she expected. A deep pounding shook the wooden door. Stelile's body froze. Lily woke with a frightened cry. Daniel stood immediately, his face hard, his hand gripping the wooden handle of the blade he had sharpened the night before. The pounding came again, louder this time, followed by voices. Outside, angry, demanding, "Open the door, human, hand her over." Stelile's breath caught in her throat. Her whole body trembled. She whispered, "It's them." Her voice breaking, she tried to stand, but her legs gave way beneath her. Daniel's eyes flicked to her, steady and calm. "Stay back," he told her. "I will deal with this." Lily clung to Stelile's arm, whispering in a small voice, "Don't be scared." But her own eyes were wide with fear. The pounding stopped. and then the door rattled as if someone tried to force it open. Daniel stepped forward, his voice low but filled with iron. "This is my home. You will not enter." A cruel laugh came from the other side. "Your home means nothing, human. The cursed one belongs to us. Hand her over and we may spare you and your child." Selai's heart twisted painfully at those words. She wanted to shout, to tell Daniel to give her up, to protect his daughter. But no sound came from her throat. She was too afraid, too torn. She had never been defended before. Never had someone stand between her and death, and now she could not bear the thought of him paying the price. The door shook again, and then a heavy crack split the wood. The villagers were trying to break through. Daniel braced himself, his shoulders tense. He looked back once, his gaze locking with Selai's. "Stay with Lily," he said firmly. Then he pushed the door open before they could smash it. Torches lit the night outside. A group of villagers stood with hard faces, their hands gripping stones and crude weapons. Their leader stepped forward, his voice full of authority. "Human, you have broken our law. You have taken what was meant for death. Do not make this harder. Step aside." Daniel stood in the doorway, tall and unmoving, the firelight from their torches flickering across his face. His voice was steady. "I will not step aside. You buried her alive because she could not give what you demanded. But she is not your property, not your victim. She is a life. And in this house she is family." The villagers growled with anger. Some stepped forward, but the leader raised his hand to stop them, his eyes narrowing. "Family," he spat. "She cannot give family. She cannot give children. She cannot give future." Daniel's jaw tightened, his voice rising. "She gives kindness, she gives hope, she gives something you have forgotten. Humanity." The word hung in the air, sharp as the desert wind. Inside the house, Selai clutched Lily, her body trembling. But as she heard Daniel's words, something inside her shifted. She had spent her whole life believing she was nothing, worthless, and yet this man spoke as if she was more than all their laws, more than their traditions. Her tears fell, not from fear, but from something else, something stronger. The villagers shouted, their torches waving. Some demanded blood. Others looked uneasy. The leader sneered. "You would fight us for her, human. You would risk your life for one cursed woman." Daniel raised his blade slightly, his voice hard as stone. "Yes." A tense silence fell, the flames crackling, the desert wind whistling. Between them, the villagers shifted, uncertain. Their leader glared at Daniel, but behind him some of the younger ones lowered their eyes, doubt creeping into their faces. Selai could not remain hidden any longer. She pushed herself up, weak legs carrying her toward the doorway. Lily tried to hold her back, but she shook. Her head, "No, I must." Her voice trembling but clear. She stepped into the torchlight, her eyes red with tears but her chin lifted. The villagers gasped, seeing her alive, seeing her standing beside the human who defied them. Her voice broke but carried strength she never knew she had. "You buried me because I could not give life, but here I found life worth living," she said, her eyes sweeping over the faces of those who had condemned her. "I am not cursed. I am not useless. I am alive, and I will not go back into the ground," the leader shouted with rage, calling. Her words poison, but the crowd murmured, some whispering uncertainly, their hard faces wavering. For the first time, Selai saw doubt in their eyes. Daniel stepped closer to her, his presence solid beside her. Lily stood in the doorway, her small figure holding a torch that burned brightly. The three of them together looked like something unbreakable, something beyond law or tradition. The villagers hesitated, the leader snarling in fury, but he saw his people's hesitation, and he knew this battle was slipping from his hands. With a final curse, he turned away, and slowly, the others followed, their torches drifting back into the night. The silence that followed was heavy. Selai's knees gave way, and Daniel caught her before she fell. Lily dropped the torch and threw her arms around Selai's waist. Selai wept, not from fear, but from relief. For the first time in her life, someone had stood for her, and for the first time, she had stood for herself. In the quiet night, Daniel whispered to her, "They will come again, but you are not alone now." Selai nodded through her tears, her voice breaking. "I am not alone." And for the first time, those words felt true. The house felt different after that night. Selai could feel it in the air. Something had changed inside her, and inside the walls that had sheltered her, she was no longer only a broken woman waiting for death. She was part of something. Daniel still worked each day, chopping wood, fixing tools, and taking care of the little farm patch outside the stone house. But now Selai found herself helping whenever she could, even if her body was still weak. She insisted on standing, on doing small tasks. She cooked with the little food they had, cleaned the rough table, and repaired torn clothes with patient hands. Lily followed her everywhere, her small laughter filling the quiet house. She asked Selai to braid her hair, to tell her stories of strange creatures from her homeland, to sit by her side while she played with her doll. Selai's heart grew softer with every smile from the child. She began to feel something new inside her chest, something she thought had been buried along with her in that pit. The feeling of belonging. Daniel watched quietly at first, his eyes lingering when Selai and Lily sat together by the fire. He saw how Selai's eyes lit up when Lily laughed, how she leaned close to listen to the child's endless questions. There was a gentleness in Selai that no cruelty had managed to erase. And in those quiet evenings, Daniel began to realize that his home was no longer just a shelter. It was alive again. Still, fear lingered in Selai's heart. Every night she worried that the villagers would return with greater force. She sometimes woke from nightmares, expecting to hear the sound of pounding fists against the door. But Daniel's steady presence always calmed her. He never raised his voice, never spoke with anger, only with certainty. "You are safe here," he would remind her, and little by little she started to believe it. One day, as Selai worked beside Lily, mending an old blanket, she felt the girl lean against her shoulder and say, "You smile now." Selai paused, touched her own lips as if surprised. She had not even noticed. "I suppose I do," she whispered, her throat tight with emotion. She thought of the years she had lived without laughter, without comfort, and she realized she had not truly smiled since childhood. Now a human child had given her back that piece of herself. Later that evening, Daniel brought home a bundle of wild herbs. Selai took them eagerly, showing him how to grind and mix them into a soothing drink. She explained that her mother had once taught her this skill, long before her people turned cold. Daniel listened carefully, respecting every word. When he sipped the drink and nodded in approval, Selai felt pride swell in her heart, a simple pride she had been denied for so long. As the days blended together, Selai began to feel more like part of the family, not just a guest. She swept the floors, prepared food, and even began teaching Lily small phrases in her alien tongue. Lily repeated them with giggles, her accent clumsy but sweet. Daniel would sit by the fire at night watching them, his eyes thoughtful, sometimes catching Selai's gaze. And in those moments, an unspoken connection seemed to pass between them. But outside their walls, the danger was still real one afternoon. While Selai was gathering water, she saw a figure on the horizon, someone watching from a distance, a villager spy. She froze, the jug slipping from her hands, the water spilling into the sand. She rushed back to the house, her voice shaking as she told Daniel what she saw. His face grew grim. "They are waiting, watching," he said, but there was no fear in his voice, only determination. "We will not run." Selai felt guilt pressing against her chest. She whispered, "Because of me, they will come for you and Lily." Daniel shook his head, his hand resting firmly on her shoulder. "Because of you, this house has warmth again," he said. "I would not trade that for their approval." His words struck her deeply. Her eyes filled with tears, she turned away, unable to hide them. That night, when the fire crackled low, Selai sat quietly, Lily sleeping in her lap, Daniel across from her, sharpening his blade. She whispered softly, "Why do you risk so much for me?" Daniel looked at her, his expression steady. "Because I know what it is to lose," he said, his voice low. "And because no one should face the world alone." Selai's heart trembled at his words. Her tears fell silently. But for once they were not from sorrow. They were from something gentler. The bond between them grew stronger with every passing day. Salai no longer felt like a shadow haunting the house. She felt alive. She laughed when Lily teased her. She hummed old songs when she worked. She even caught herself standing taller, no longer hiding her face in shame. She was still afraid, but beneath the fear was something powerful, the beginning of courage. And when the wind outside carried the whispers of the villagers again, when Salai saw shadows moving in the distance, she did not shrink back completely. Instead, she stood beside Daniel, her hands trembling but her chin lifted. She whispered, "I will not hide forever." And Daniel, with a quiet nod, said, "You won't have to. Not while I am here." For the first time in her life, Salai felt like more than a burden, more than a curse. She felt like part of something greater, part of a family that had chosen her, not rejected her. And though the danger was still near, inside that small house she had found a bond stronger than fear, a bond she would fight to protect. The days after the spy was seen were heavy with waiting. Salai felt it in every breath, every sound. Outside the house made her chest tighten. She knew the elders would not stay silent, they would return, this time not with whispers but with force. Daniel prepared quietly, sharpening his blade, stacking wood at the door, checking the latch again and again. Lily noticed too. Though Daniel tried to hide it, the little girl clung closer to Salai, as if she sensed the storm was coming. The night they came, the desert was full of fire. Torches flickered like angry stars as the villagers approached the lonely house. Salai stood at the window, her body shaking. She could see their faces, hard and unforgiving. She could hear their voices carried by the wind. "The cursed one lives," they shouted. "Bring her out or we will burn this place to the ground." Salai's knees grew weak, but this time she did not fall. She turned to Daniel, her voice trembling. "I cannot let them harm you. I will. Go to them." Daniel stepped forward, his hand gripping her arm firmly, his eyes steady. "No, Salai, you will not. They buried you once. I will not let them bury you again." His voice was low but full of fire. Salai's throat tightened. Her tears burned, she whispered. "But you will die for me." He shook his head. "Then I die knowing I did the right thing." The pounding at the door began, loud and violent. Lily cried out in fear. Salai turned to the child, and for the first time felt something she had never dared feel before. Strength. She knelt down, holding Lily's small hands in her own. "Do not be afraid," she whispered. "I will not let them take me, not from you, not from your father." Her voice shook, but her eyes burned with a new fire. Daniel opened the door before they could smash it down. The torchlight spilled inside. The villagers filled the night with anger. Their leader stepped forward again, his voice sharp like stone. "Human, you defy us again. This is your last chance. Hand her over, or we take all of you." But before Daniel could speak, Salai stepped into the doorway beside him, her body trembling but her chin held high. The torches lit her face, showing not fear but defiance. The crowd gasped at the sight of her alive and standing strong. Her voice rang out into the night. "You buried me because I could not give children, because I could not give what you demanded. But here I found something greater. I found life worth living. I found a family who sees me as more than a womb." The villagers stirred. Some growled angrily, but others shifted uncomfortably, their eyes uncertain. The leader spat. "You speak lies. You bring shame on us all. You are nothing." Salai's voice rose louder, shaking but full of truth. "I am not nothing. I am not cursed. I am alive because he chose to save me. And I will not crawl back into the ground for you. Not now, not ever." Daniel stood beside her, his presence strong. Lily stepped behind them holding a lantern. The three of them looked like a single flame refusing to be put out. Daniel raised his blade and said clearly, "If you want her, you will have to kill me first." The leader glared. But behind him, the villagers murmured louder. Some lowered their torches, doubt spreading through them like cracks in stone. Salai felt her fear twist into strength, her voice steady now. "You call me cursed. Yet look at yourselves. You bury your own people in the ground for traditions that bring only death. You fear what cannot give life, but you forget that kindness itself is life. Hope is life, and I have found both here." The villagers hesitated, torn between their leader's fury and the truth in her words. One of the younger ones finally spoke, his voice uncertain. "Why should we kill her again? She has harmed no one." Others began to murmur agreement. The leader shouted, trying to silence them, but his power was slipping. In that moment, Sterile realized she was no longer the weak woman crying in the sand. She was no longer the victim begging for mercy. She was standing, speaking, and being heard. The fear still lived in her chest, but it no longer ruled her. Daniel glanced at her with pride in his eyes, and Lily held her hand tightly, the bond between them stronger than any law. At last, the leader cursed and turned away, his rage burning, but he knew he could not drag her away without breaking his own control. One by one, the villagers lowered their torches and followed him into the desert night, their angry shouts fading into silence. The doorway was quiet again, the desert wind, the only sound. Stelile's knees buckled and Daniel caught her in his arms. Lily threw herself against them both, tears streaming down her cheeks. Sterile wept too, but this time not from fear, from freedom. She had faced them, she had spoken, and she had chosen to live. Daniel whispered to her, his voice steady as ever. "They will not bury you again, not while I breathe." Sterile clung to him, whispering back through her tears, "I am not alone anymore." She looked at Lily, who smiled through her crying, and felt her heart swell with something she never thought she could have, love. The night that had begun with fear ended with a promise. Sterile had been given back her life, not by tradition, not by her people, but by the choice of a human and his child, and now she had made her own choice. She would not return to the sand. She would stand. She would live. She would protect the family that had given her a home, and under the stars, with the desert quiet. Once more, Sterile knew that this was only the beginning.